Welcome to the Great Coaches Podcast.
To me, being perfect is not about that scoreboard out there.
This is a chance of a lifetime.
When you can understand the person, you can then work towards a common goal.
We are all on the same team.
Know your role and do it to the best of your ability.
Focus on the fundamentals. We've gone over time and time again.
Your defense has got to be better.
Leave no doubt tonight.
Great moments are born from great opportunity.
Hello and welcome to the Great Coaches Podcast, where we believe that there is no algorithm for leadership, and so we interview great sports coaches from around the world to try and find ideas to help all of us be better leaders. Our great coach on this episode is Al Scates. Al is a former American volleyball player and coach. As a player, he was selected as a collegiate All-American and also represented the USA national team. He transitioned into coaching in 1964 and went on to be the head coach of the UCLA men's team for 48 years. He would become the winningest volleyball coach in the history of the NCAA, securing 19 titles, which ties him for the most NCAA titles won by a coach in any single sport. His team holds 10 NCAA records, including most consecutive victories at 48, most consecutive home wins at 83, and most consecutive tournament wins at 14. He was inducted into the International Volleyball Hall of Fame in 1993. At 84, Al is still sharp and insightful, and with a positive and optimistic view of the world, which is contagious. In our interview, some of the highlights for me were the training method he used that encouraged players to move up and down across capability groups that was separated by a blue curtain, and how this encouraged work ethic and produced an egalitarian approach to selection. The quotes he reads from the book by John Wooden that influenced him so greatly as a young coach, in particular the 4 Laws of Learning, and the stories he tells about the winning teams he had across each of 5 consecutive decades. This is a fun conversation with a truly great coach, and I hope you enjoyed as much as we did. And just before you hear from Al, if you like what you hear in our podcast and you'd like to learn more, head over to our website, thegreatcoachespodcast.com. There you will find loads of exclusive video and audio content that you can sift through, download and share. We also have an insights database which contains 1 to 2 minute videos on leadership topics like communication, care and conflict, which you can also download and share to bring a different perspective to the challenges your team might be facing. And now, please enjoy our interview with the legendary Al Scates.
You're listening to the Great Coaches Podcast.
Al Scates, good morning and welcome to the Great Coaches Podcast.
Well, thank you.
Very happy to be chatting with you today, and perhaps something really simple to get us going. Could you tell us where you are in the world and what you've been up to so far today?
Well, I'm in Los Angeles, Encino, California, which is part of Los Angeles. And I went out and played 18 holes of golf with Larry Rundle, who was captain of our 68 Olympic volleyball team, and played on my first championship team at UCLA. Before the NCAAs, it was a USA Collegiate Championship. And I lost $3 to him. He sunk about a 45-foot putt on the 18th. Took away a few bucks from me and won 3. So we play every Tuesday and Thursday. And the rest of the time, I came home and worked on my honey-do list and was enjoying a little cigar in the patio when I got reminded about the meeting today.
Well, thank you for pulling yourself away from that cigar just to chat with us. I'll be trying to make it worth your while through the interview today. Al, you've had experience of some great coaches. I mean, when I was researching and preparing for today, I could see names like Bill Rankin, Bert de Groot, the great John Wooden, and of course, Doug Beal, who we've also had as a guest on the podcast. And I wanted to start by asking you, from this experience working with these people and seeing them up close, what is it you think the great coaches do differently that sets them apart?
Well, my experience is that they don't all do the same thing. The three coaches who really influenced me were quite different. And they worked to their strengths. And if you include Doug Beal, I'm talking about four coaches that are really different. I'll start with Bill Rankin. He was my high school basketball coach. And he played basketball at UCLA after World War II. And in 1957, I was a backup center on his team, and we won the Marine League for the first time in our school history. He was tough, but we had fun at practices. He enjoyed being out there coaching, and he'd been doing it for a long time. And I was going to be an electrical engineer like my Uncle Joe, and I started coaching, and I decided coaching the kids on the playground, 4 different groups of 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 14-year-olds, and 16-year-olds. I decided I was going to have fun, just like Bill Rankin. And I probably laughed and enjoyed myself at every practice that I ever conducted, with the exception of high school football, where I wasn't the head coach and I had to be more serious. So that's what Bill did for me. He taught me how to have fun and how to let the players have fun that I was coaching. And he gave me the desire to coach because it was something he enjoyed. And that's what he gave me. Now, Colonel Bert DeGroot was the next coach that influenced me. He was retired Air Force Dean of Students at Santa Monica College, which was a 2-year college. When I started coaching, we only practiced, and when I started playing at UCLA, we only practiced one night a week. But the colonel had his team practicing 5 or 6 days a week, and the younger men he coached became the best college team in the country. And he was very strict and disciplined. And later, when I coached the national men's team in 1971 and 72, when I was the head coach, I had Colonel Burt as my assistant. And he just, players didn't fool around when he was around. He had that military persona about him, which is good to have from time to time. But the best thing about him is he wanted to elevate the sport. And in 1963, my first season at UCLA, he told me that he couldn't form a college league, but because I was at UCLA, I should form one. And so in 1963, I formed a league. And you can say he was one of the founders because he got me started. And we had a volleyball league. Prior to that, we just went out and played at YMCAs. We played double elimination. So Bert was an important influence. And then I didn't know John Wooden when I started out in the 60s because I couldn't afford to coach volleyball unless I was working full-time as a teacher. And so John practiced from 3 to 5 in the men's gym. And then the freshman team from 5 to 7. And then I came on and practiced with wrestling and women's gymnastics. So I had 1/3 of the gym. So I didn't actually see John, but I read his book called Practical Modern Basketball. After he won 2 NCAA championships, he published this book in 1966. And the first chapter is My Coaching Philosophy. And that had a big influence. I'm holding the book here in my hand, and I think I'll read a few things I read in 1966 that influenced me. Talking about his players, he said, they must be eager to become the very best that they are capable of becoming. And then he says, I want my players to be able to feel sincerely, to feel that doing the best that you are capable of doing is victory in itself, and less than that is defeat. And then later in talking to him, whether you win or lost, if the players are doing the best they can, that's all that mattered to coach. And he's talking about the coach as a teacher. He says, since the most important responsibility of a coach in regard to the actual playing of the game is to teach his players properly and effectively to execute the various fundamentals of the game. He is, first of all, a teacher. And then something he said in this book that became the 4 laws of learning, which he got into much, much more often later in his coaching career. But this changed my way of coaching, this 1 half paragraph, and here it is. A fundamental must be explained and demonstrated. The correct demonstration must be imitated by the players. Their demonstration must be constructively criticized and corrected, and then the players must repeat the execution of the proper model until the correct habit has been formed to the point where they will act instinctively in the correct manner. Those are the important things I read in this book. The rest was about basketball, which I already knew about basketball because I took a class from his assistant, Jerry Norman, and I used his simple offense to win the LA County Park Championships with a bunch of 10-year-olds when I was a junior at UCLA. We ran the UCLA offense. It was that simple with a bunch of 10-year-olds. So to wrap up quoting him, he says, it is not what you do, but how well you execute it if it is based on sound, valid principles. There are no real secrets to the game, at least not for very long. And so even in the 70s, in 79, when we went undefeated for the first time and won another national championship, I was only using 3 offensive plays, whereas the teams, all the other teams were running probably 40, 50 different variations of plays. I just kept it simple and executed it as well as I possibly could. John Wooden and I became good friends after he retired. So he took an office next to mine because he wanted to give up his big office, but he didn't want to leave UCLA after he retired because he exercised on the track every day. And he'd answer his thousands of letters that would pour into his office weekly. And he didn't even he used his own stamps to mail them. He wouldn't even use the university post. But then we talked, and I showed him this book and the things I underlined and how it influenced me in coaching. Now, Doug Beal, he played for me in 72 as a backup setter. He was a very good blocker, and I liked my first team to run against him and try to side out against him. But I admired the job he did with the 84 Olympic team. He actually cut 2 of the best players on the team that could have been in the starting 6. But he was trying to mold this diverse group of players, key players from the Midwest. He had coached one of them, in fact, at Ohio State when he was coaching there. But he eliminated these two guys, and he still won a gold medal. And he practiced them like he estimated 10,000 hours between. I think he came on in '82 in 3 years and scheduled matches all over the world. Somehow kept these guys together with very little pay except a jobs program where they worked part-time. And I know I had 4 players on that team that one of them got cut. That would be the 5th guy. But they were living 3 to a bedroom, and somehow he kept them together and became the best team in the world. So I certainly respect the job he did.
Al, Mike Seeley, one of your ex-players, I believe, said that your culture was based on Darwinism. He said it was the survival of the fittest. From what I read, your practice sessions used a scoring system to determine who was going to be in the top group. How did this create positive performance pressure in the team?
When I started coaching in the fall of 1962, we shared the gym with a gymnastic team and a wrestling team. So we drew these, and we were in the middle. So we drew these large curtains to separate the 3 areas of the gym. And so those curtains were always there. And by the time Mike came along, I was carrying, I'd say up to 36 players. And I never had anybody standing around during practice watching. I had them all doing drills. And by that time I had, 2 full-time assistant coaches. In the beginning, I coached by myself on one court. But so I had a coach for each group. And so the top 12 players I coached. And depending on the amount of assistants, if I had 4 assistants, many times I had a volunteer assistant. Then I would put the second 12 with another assistant, and then the others, the third group, with another assistant. And then later, as players quit, I didn't cut them. If they were willing to do the things I made the first group do, which is 300 sit-ups, 300 push-ups, sprints along the length of the gym, dives, rolls, maximum jumps. If they were willing to work as hard as the first group, I didn't cut them. But they were divided behind these curtains. You didn't want balls flying underneath people's feet when they were jumping. So it became, I didn't see the players behind the blue curtain, okay? But if I needed a player, if somebody wasn't playing well, I would yell over to my assistant coach, send me an outside hitter, and I'd send an outside hitter down. So whoever was playing good on the second court would come up to the first court. And the second court coach could say the same thing to the third court coach. So everybody had a lot of pressure to perform as well as they could because they wanted to move up a court. Now, as far as the point system, every drill I won, I kept score. And we ran team drills. I didn't get on the stand and hit balls at players and that type of thing. I mean, everybody, the drills were initiated by a serve. And so, somebody won the drill, somebody lost the drill. Now, if my first team was losing most of the drills, I would change a player from the second team to the first team. And I'd send somebody down. And if that player performed well, then he stayed there. And if the second team got worse and wasn't competing well enough with the first team, we'd bring somebody up from the second court, from behind the blue curtain. One year, 1992, we had just 2 courts, and I had 4 Olympians on the second court the whole year, 4 future Olympians, with 1 coach, Asbjørn Volstead, a Norwegian player who I recruited off of videotape. Anyway, he came back to get a master's degree. He was a great coach. He started for me for 4 years. And we went undefeated. In 84, we went 38-0 when he was a freshman. He was a great player. I used him as a middle blocker. And then I taught him how to be an outside hitter. And he won championships in both positions, where he has to pass half the court. He didn't know how to pass. So I had 2 middle blockers, Eric Sullivan and Kevin Wong, who I wanted to convert to outside hitters and passers. Well, after a year of training, Asbjørn had cut all the rest of the players over there. He'd come over and ask me if I could cut them. I said, if they're not working hard, you can cut them. So he wound up with these 4 guys who all became Olympians. Kevin Wong in beach volleyball, John Spiraz, our Olympic volleyball coach and UCLA coach. I think he's been to 3 Olympics as an assistant and head coach. And Eric Sullivan became a libero for 3 Olympics. He learned how to pass so well. And Jeff Nygaard was in 3 Olympics too, and indoors and 1 on the beach. But they were behind the blue curtain for the entire year, working their butt off. And this is what Mike Seeley called survival of the fittest. And maybe he's right.
Al, can I ask you about John Spiraz, actually? Because I've got this nice quote from him, and he says, the way he managed to make objective decisions was to say fairly separate from the players. It was never personal, and once he graduated, he enjoyed the relationship that developed with his players. So I wanted to ask you, how did keeping this type of distance from the players help you as a leader?
Well, first of all, I wasn't there until practice started. The way you didn't become a volleyball coach to earn a good salary. I needed to work full time as a teacher so I could afford to be a volleyball coach. So after I taught 8 classes or whatever it was, I didn't get there to UCLA until about 3:15, and we started practice at 3 during that time. So I wasn't there to talk to. Now, they could talk to me if they wanted to stay after practice. During practice, when I came in the door, I had my assistant coach already condition them. When I came in the door, we got out the volleyballs. There was no time to talk to the players at that point. It was time to drill. And the way Wooden taught me to drill was I gave them directions during the drill. I never stopped practice to talk to anybody. I talked to them during the drill, or I demonstrated during the drill. So, and I didn't hang around because I also had a family. So after practice, I left. So when, we didn't have an opportunity to become friends. And besides, I didn't play the players I liked the best anyway. I played the players who did the best job together, which wasn't necessarily all the best players. I was interested in winning championships every year, so I never started 6 seniors on a team. Because if I had a freshman that was as good as a senior, I'd start the freshman, or close to being good, because that freshman was going to be better than the senior anyway by the end of the season. So I never had the most seniors I ever had on a starting NCAA championship team is 4. That way we could win a championship next year with players who had been there and experienced it. Now, after we won a championship, after the players graduated, I became friends with most of them. Sue and I celebrated our 62nd wedding anniversary Saturday, and I must have had, I don't know how they knew it was my anniversary. I must have had texts from about 30 or 40 players, ex-players, just congratulating us on our anniversary. And I stay in touch with these guys. My former players are among my 10 best friends, a lot of them, and a former trainer, for that matter. Dr. Bill Cowdery is a former trainer of mine for 4 years as a student trainer. So, I'm going. I had a text from two of my guys. We're going to go see a UCLA volleyball game against Irvine, and today. So, I just want to be objective, and then afterwards we'll become friends. Now, many coaches are successful being friends with their players. Marv Dunphy at Pepperdine, for example, is one that comes to mind.
62 years, Al, I should say congratulations. My wife and I are closing in on 20, so we're a little bit behind you, but we're heading in the right direction, I guess. Al, one of the other things I wanted to ask you about was team rules, because I have this little quote from you, and you say, don't have a bunch of stupid rules, where if a player breaks the rule, you have to penalise them. And I thought this was a little different from what most people talk about. So when it does come to having guardrails or team rules or whatever you want to call them, how did you go about handling that?
Well, I had one rule. Don't do anything to embarrass the team or the university. That was my one rule. Now, when I started getting reporting to female associate athletic directors, they wanted to see my rules. So when I gave them my one rule, they wanted to see the rest of them. So I typed up about 20 rules, and then I'd take it in every year and then look at my rules, and then I'd put it back in the file and change the date the next year. And this went on forever. But the players never saw those rules. They only saw heard one verbal rule. Don't do anything to embarrass the team or the university. And I dealt with it when they did that. And the worst thing would be a suspension for kicked out of practice in a few matches. That would be the worst thing. I've never had to kick anybody off the team. During practice, the worst thing that can happen is I kick somebody out of practice. But since we had more than one court, I'd usually just send them down behind the blue curtain to the next court.
Al, Bill Ferguson says that you're the best in-game tactician there ever was, which is a great thing to have someone say about you. But when it comes to communicating tactics, particularly in the heat of the game when there's lots going on, have you found ways that work better than others?
Well, when I started coaching, as far as communication goes, we weren't allowed to coach. It was like tennis coaches. They weren't allowed to coach. So by the time I started coaching at UCLA, I'd already coached baseball teams. So I just gave them signals with my hand, where to serve and how to block, what kind of blocking scheme to use. So I just used signals. You couldn't get off the bench. That was the rule when I first started coaching. And then later, of course, you can just go up and talk to the players. You can stand next to the court. So later, you can just talk to them. You don't have to waste a timeout to tell them things. So I had serving rules, serving areas, which all the coaches use today. And with my hands, my fingers, And I could give them 2 to split the zones of the court if I wanted it. Pretty precise. And the blocking schemes. And I occasionally would signal a setter what play to call. Remember, we only had 3 plays for most of the career up until the late 70s. So we just did them so well, nobody could stop us most of the time. I mean, the team that wins hits better than the other team. That's the way it's always been.
One of the fascinating things about your story is you've coached championship teams in 5 different decades. Now, as the leader of the program, what's the biggest change that you've seen over that journey?
Well, in the beginning, I mean, my first volleyball coaching experience, I was a junior at UCLA, and I just finished coaching a football program, and I needed a job. So I went over to Beverly Hills High School and got hired as a trainer, learned how to tape ankles and stuff. And then they knew I was a volleyball player. They wanted me to coach their boys' volleyball team. But nobody knew how to play, so I looked for the best athlete in school, which happened to be the quarterback of the football team. And I taught him how to spike a volleyball. And he was excited. And I says, okay, all we need now is 5 great athletes besides you, and we're all set. So he went out and got some good basketball players and football players, and I taught him how to play volleyball. Well, that's, the 60s, that's what you had to do, because volleyball wasn't taught in high school. There were no club high school teams. There was no volleyball below the college level. So, and there was no women's volleyball at all. The only volleyball you could find for college age guys was in college. And then after that, you played for a local YMCA or something. Also, there was hardly any practice time. When I played at UCLA, we only practiced 1 night a week because we only had 1 gym, and the priority went to other sports. Now, here's the big change. In 1965, I was over in Mexico City. I was captain of the USA team that year, and I met a man who was president of the zone in Mexico City, and he told me that the Japanese men and the women's Olympic teams who won a gold medal and a silver medal were in Brazil, and they were stopping over in LA in December of 1965. And so when I got home from that trip, I went to our athletic director, J.D. Morgan, and I said to J.D., I can put 5,000 paying customers in our new Pauley Pavilion, which seats 12,000 people, and you can keep all the money. All the money will go to the athletic department. Just don't charge any rent. And he agreed. And then I went to USA Volleyball, and I says, if you put up the Japanese for an extra night, and we'll give you Pauley Pavilion, we'll play against the USA teams, and it'll be free. There won't be any rent. So our athletic director signed a deal with USA Volleyball, signed a deal with the Japanese, and they gave me posters, and I went down to all the beach communities in Southern California where people love volleyball, and I put up these posters, and we were charging $2 for general admission, $5 for arena level, and prior to that, the biggest crowd I ever played for in the United States was 175 people against France at Carson High School, suburb of LA. So hardly anybody knew about volleyball. But I knew a guy named Bud Ferrello, who was the editor of the Herald Examiner, and I'd come home and dictate to my wife an article about the upcoming match, and she'd type it up. I'd take it in and hand it to Bud, and he'd print it the next day. He also had a program called the Steam Room. And the Steam Room is a radio show, and I'd call in and talk about the match. And so there were 5,000 paying customers, over 5,000. And we beat the Japanese men for the first time ever. And Japanese gold medalist women, they beat us in about half an hour, beat the girls. 3-0. They were awesome. And we just won a championship that year. So we beat SC, our arch rival. And our athletic director told me that he would make volleyball an NCAA sport. He was head of the basketball committee, very influential man, negotiated the TV contracts for the NCAA. And so in 1970, he did it. Volleyball became an NCAA sport. And that's when I decided I wasn't going to be a school administrator, that eventually I was going to do something I love and earn enough money at it and stop teaching and just be a volleyball coach.
It's an amazing journey that you've been on, from very humble beginnings through to the Olympics and the decades of championships.
I'll tell you something. I was never... I was going to be a basketball coach or a football coach, and I was never going to be a volleyball coach. But Glenn Eggstrom, another important coach, was my volleyball coach at UCLA, and he took a sabbatical in '62 to go to Japan. He studied underwater research, and he says, "Why don't you go apply for the job?" And I was going to be a high school basketball coach. I was number 3 in the test for LA City, and I was going to be able to go to a good high school and start my coaching career. And that's what I was going to do. I wasn't thinking about coaching volleyball. I was working on my school administration credential. I was going to be a vice principal, superintendent of schools. That's what my plan was. And Glenn did 2 things for me. When I was learning volleyball, I would miss some classes at UCLA. I was a kinesiology major. One day he saw me coming in late to class. I walked by his office. He came, says, "Yeah, I'll get in here." And he says, "Next time I see you walk by here, I want a halo around your head." He says, "You're walking in, you got sand all over you from the beach. You're getting to class late. I want you to sit in the front row. I want you to be serious as a student here." And that was the first good thing he did for me. And the second good thing, he took a sabbatical and I became the coach.
Al, could I ask you about the 3 separate occasions when your teams did a three-peat? They won 3 championships in a row. And I was wondering, as you reflect on that, what did you learn about keeping teams focused and not letting them, prepare and move forward without a sense of entitlement?
Well, the thing is, if they slept off in practice, they were going behind the blue curtain. St. John Smith, one of the best players that ever played at UCLA, was a freshman in 1976 on the first court, on the first team. And he didn't dive for a ball I thought he could recover. I sent him behind the curtain for 2 weeks, and he busted his ass, and I didn't send anybody down for 2 weeks, so he didn't get to come up. At the end of 2 weeks, he dove for every ball for the next 4 years he could possibly have a chance of getting. He worked harder. As a senior, I had a guy named Karch Karai come on the team, and I told St. John he's going to partner up with this guy because we're going to win a championship if you work hard with Karch. And he was a freshman, and St. John was a senior. And during this drill that lasted 45 minutes where they sprinted and did 300 sit-ups, the circle drill we call it. Karch and St. John would compete to see who could win. They would be lapping other players who became Olympians. They'd be lapping them around the gym, working so hard. And I think if players knew that if they worked as hard as they could, even if they were behind the curtain, they had a chance to come up. And once they got up on the first court, some of them never left. So I didn't ever motivate anybody verbally. I mean, I told them our goal is to win the championship. And I didn't yell at them or anything. I mean, I've had players who yelled at them in my behalf. Karch was one of the guys that would do that if he didn't think somebody was working hard. And I've had plenty of guys since him.
Karch, of course, is now a great head coach in his own right and potentially could be one of the greatest ever.
Yeah, he was my assistant coach when we went undefeated in 79, 80, 81. Oh, no. He was my assistant coach in 1983. I was his first coaching job. He was coaching one of those groups behind the curtain. And he didn't graduate. He had a double major. He wanted to be a medical doctor. So he didn't graduate until his fifth year was completed at UCLA. And, of course, you could only play 4, so I made him assistant coach.
Al, if I could take you back and introduce you to that young man that was coaching at Beverly Hills High School, knowing what you know now, what would you say to that person?
Well, I'd tell him to take a job that he really loved and marry a good woman. That's all he needs to know. You've got to love going to work every day. I enjoyed coaching volleyball, obviously. I coached there for 50 years. So I must have enjoyed it. But
you've been married longer, so you've done both of those things.
Yeah. I married a good woman too. I did both. I did both things. But I had to work my butt off to make volleyball a job where I could actually earn. The athletic director came in the second year and thought I was making $100, a new athletic director. So he gave me a $300 raise and told me I was making $400. Well, the first year I coached at UCLA, they gave me $100, but that was the entire budget because I told them I couldn't take any salary because I wanted to play on the Olympic team, and I would be a professional if I took money for coaching, which was the rules at that time. So the first year, I bought 10 volleyballs and paid the entry fees with my own money. So not only it cost me to coach volleyball the first year, the second year I actually got a little budget and I made $400. Won a championship, I made $600. After that, I got it. Fourth year, I made $1,000. So I always made more money teaching than I did coaching. It was not, you didn't make serious money until I finally became full-time at UCLA in 1978. So I was a full-time coach there 34 years. And I was still teaching full-time while I was supposedly a full-time coach. So I had 2 full-time jobs.
I feel like I'm keeping you from the rest of that cigar. So maybe one last question, if I could.
Yeah, sure.
The coach Russ Rose had this to say about your legacy. I'd like to read that to you before I ask you the question. He said, okay, the number of great players who have played at UCLA and the bond that they all have for each other and the university is the greatest contribution he has made to the sport. That's his lasting legacy. It's a great quote. It's a wonderful quote from a great coach in his own right. But I wanted to ask you, in your words, what you think your legacy is as a coach?
Well, I'd say it's probably forming the first volleyball league out here for colleges. I had to kick Santa Monica College out of the league the second year, even though Bert DeGroot gave me the idea to form the league, because he was beating the other four-year colleges, and the athletic directors were going to pull their colleges out because the junior college was beating them. So he formed the league for junior colleges or two-year schools that is still going on. That was one. The second one was putting 5,000 people in Pauley Pavilion to watch volleyball. And that was huge because that's why volleyball became an NCAA sport. Without J.D. Morgan. Oh, one more thing. How about the number of coaches out there that are coaching? I've got 50 coaches coaching in college. And Steinmetzger at UCLA won a beach volleyball championship. Mike Seeley at UCLA won a women's championship. Andy Banikowski won several NCAAs at UCLA. John Spera's going to win one at UCLA. He won 3 at UC Irvine. And the national team coaches, well, Karch Karai and John Spera are coaching the Olympic teams. So I'd say that was a pretty good influence, those guys out there coaching that have played at UCLA. The men's staff at UCLA is all UCLA players, the 2 assistants. So, Brandon Talaferro was that first setter I was talking about, 97, that knew how to set without me helping him.
It's a pretty amazing coaching tree, Al. And I think if we got these people in a room, I reckon they might reference the fact that you taught them about hard work and the merits of a good work ethic too. But I could be wrong.
Oh, I only had 4 hours sleep 6 days a week. When I got home, I spent it with family until the kids and the wife went to bed. I didn't start working again until 10 o'clock. That's when I looked at video. I used to have my assistant splice 16 millimeter film together into 6 different rotations and look at 16 millimeter tape and then later videotape. And I still wasn't earning enough. I had to write. I wrote 9 books on volleyball. And I do my best writing between 10 and 2 a.m. Get up at 6 and then I had to take my son to water polo practice at Beverly Hills High School. So I got up at 5 for a year because the court, there's a swimming pool and then the basketball court goes over the pool at 8 o'clock for all the PE classes in there. So thank God I learned how to drive at 16. I didn't have to do that anymore.
It's an amazing legacy, Al. And I appreciate you spending an hour with us today and telling us a little bit about your amazing story, which continues on now through the coaching tree that you've created.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed it. Once you get me started, I just keep going. So anyway.
Thanks, Al.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. You have been listening to the great coach, Al Scates. I hope you got a lot out of Al's positive and engaging style and found a few ideas that you can bring to your own dinner table, locker room, or boardroom table for discussion. Al was great to interview, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. Some of the other key highlights from the discussion for me were how he only had one team rule: don't do anything to embarrass the team or university. The way he was able to maintain objectivity in selection and how this allowed him to pick the players that worked best together. And leaving a legacy of having helped shape 50 people that have gone on to coach in colleges and at the Olympics. And just before we go, if you have any feedback, then please let us know. Just like Darren Cogger, who said, fantastic insight, great interviews, really interesting people. Thanks, Darren. We love the interaction with the people around the world who listen, and so if you have any feedback for us, then please let us know. All the details on how to connect with us are in the show notes or on our website, thegreatcoachespodcast.com.